All right. So, you want to kick it off?
Sure, I'll kick it off. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah, it seems like you guys can hear me. We'll start with Meet the Players, just a little bit of an introduction. I'll start with myself. I think I've been introduced as Andrey Feldman, Vice President of Product at Sprout. Very happy to be here. As you can see, I look better in person. My head is not as big. Nick?
I'm Nick Van Weerdenburg, the founder of Wrangle.io. Likewise, I think I look better in person too. So Wrangle.io is a JavaScript consulting firm, and we'll get more into that. So Wrangle was founded in 2013. We're a Toronto-based company, all full-time people working from our Toronto office. Currently, we have about 76 developers, or 76 people, about 50 developers. We're North American. We're only JavaScript. We only focus on next-generation modern web applications. And we're focused on AngularJS, React, PhoneGap, and Ionic for both the web and mobile. So,
awesome. I'll talk a little bit about Sprout, but...
I missed one. Actually, there we go. One more.
Okay. We have some technical challenges, as you can see. It takes a vice president and a CEO to get to this. Just before we continue, a little show of hands. I'm kind of curious. How many of you guys are technical, like developers, hardcore JavaScript? Awesome. Okay. And then the rest of you are what, business, sales, product people? Any of those in the room? Oh, I see one. Hey. Hi. It's the way to go. All right. It will help us a little bit gauge the discussion and everything. I'll start by telling you a little bit about Sprout. So Sprout is a Canadian startup, and anyone heard about Sprout, saw us in the news, or anything at all? Maybe? No? I can't see anything with the slide. Oh, yes, you guys better have heard. There's some guys from our team here cheering up. That's good. So Canadian startup, founded in 2012. Two female entrepreneurs. One of them is Martha Switzer. She's based out of Vancouver, and we have a little bit of an office there. And Christina Ford, who is based out of here in Toronto, in our office here in Toronto. I think I'll talk a little bit more about what we do, but in a nutshell, we're a health and wellness engagement platform, and our goal is really to help coworkers get fit together. So when you think about this, we're this mini social network that you would have in your organization, if it's a big organization, where people have the right context to share information about health and wellness, participate in various challenges, create groups, challenge one another, have events, health and wellness-created events. On the technical side, I saw most of you guys are technical. That's why I asked. We are based on the web or backend on LAMP and Redis heavily, and then PhoneGap and Ionic on the mobile device. And this is, I think, is going to be really the focus of this conversation. Any reaction? Anyone know the movie or the scene? Okay, so you can guess the question. So what does Sprout do? In one word or two, a lot. As I was saying before, health and wellness social engagement platform, we have a lot of features and capabilities. But I'll give you a little bit of a rundown just so that you have the background. So first and foremost, we're very focused on the social aspect. We believe you need to have coworkers and friends to encourage you to get healthy and well. And without that support, it will be really tough. So our focus is really on the social aspect. And of course, there is this component of Facebook-like capabilities where people can share things, people can like things, people can interact with each other. In addition to that, not less important is, of course, company challenges and personal health goals. So you can set those up, and company challenges are huge. So as an example, in my previous role, one of the things that we wanted to do was, get huge competition. Obviously, I didn't succeed in that competition, but still it was something where we had a whiteboard, we had a spreadsheet, and we were tracking who can lift how much weight and run fast, et cetera, et cetera. We didn't have a platform like this, and it would have been awesome if a platform like this would have been provided to me as a manager or as a leader in an organization to engage my group of people in those kind of activities. So company challenges, setting up personal health goals are huge and key. The next thing is really about interest groups, event calendars, and device integrations. So we're integrated with Strava, Nike, Fitbit, Jawbone, you name it, quite a few. So we get information automatically from there. Now, with all of that background, and I promise this is it. Hopefully you have enough context to understand what we were building, all right? And Nick will have a comment on that later on. Our Sprout mobile experience 1 year ago wasn't the best that you can get. It was really optimized HTML5 site. It suffered from poor user experience, mainly because there was a lot of slowness related with generating code on the server and then giving it back. All of those things that you have seen. HTML5 is great, but when everything is happening on the server, there is a lot of mismatch between what the user naturally wants and what they expect to see on the mobile device. In addition to that, just outside of the poor app performance, we were using a lot of traditional things that you typically use on the web. So he's laughing here. He understands the problems, right? So you don't use server-side jQuery and such, right? It will just slow things down. And it wasn't good. We're not getting good feedback from our users. So all in all, in the end, it translated to very high operation costs and maintenance costs. And we're a startup, small team, so we really needed to figure out, well, what is that solution that we're going to do? How are we going to build this? So as Bo Jackson says, set your goal high, and don't stop till you get there. What were our business and technical goals? An amazing user experience. That's a lofty statement. Everyone wants it. Of course, we wanted it too, right? Without an amazing user experience, it's really tough to get your people engaged. Speed to market was really crucial for us. We had a major client, consultant company, global consultant company, thousands of employees starting up with us, and we had about 8 to 10 weeks to get this to market, and we knew that most of their workforce was mobile. So, and also diverse, so there were people with iOS devices, Android devices, and BlackBerry devices, because you know what? Some partners stick to their BlackBerries. That's just how it is. So ease of maintenance was crucial for us as well. Support for multiple mobile platforms, just due to the client. And good performance on older phones. Again, we're talking about corporate America and Canada here. A lot of the times you don't control the type of phones they have. It's not early adopters, so a lot of the people would have older phones, older phone models. So that was very important. So all of those things were considerations that have been taken in. And with that in mind, we really tried to figure out, well, how can we assemble the right team? And this is where a lot of those decisions need to be made around, well, what am I going to do now, right? And some of them are tough. Specifically, do I outsource or do I do things in-house? So our first option was to, build a new team, right? We're, again, small team, startup, build a whole new mobile team, and in 10 weeks deliver a mobile application. Again, those timelines need to be taken into consideration here. We looked at that, and then we said, okay, well, that's an option. The next one was hire contractors. And we thought about this, either doing it direct or via an agency. And our third option was, well, what if we can partner with a consultancy, right, to augment our existing team? And in the end, this is really what we picked. This is what we chose, where what we've decided to do is to take our existing resources, the team that has already knowledge of all of the Sprout backend, how it operates, all of the different functionality and features, and keep them focused on building a new REST API. And the help that we needed, we had no experience in front end and mobile. We had no one who knew what to do or how to build. And this is where Nick and I met. It was quite a great introduction. And it was really important for us to evaluate a variety of different partners to figure out who we're going to work with. So picking the right partner. What was important for us is strengthen complementary areas. So as I was mentioning before, we knew backend, we knew how we can do things on our side. It was critical to understand or to get someone who can help us with the front end and with the mobile application. And in that context, AngularJS came up. We were really evaluating transitioning our front end on the web to AngularJS, and we thought, okay, is there an option here? Is there something we can do? We were looking at hybrid application experience, so it was critical for us that the partner had this because that was one of the options that we were evaluating, and we thought, okay, if we're going to go this path, we need someone who can really do that. Shared perspective and focus on UX is extremely critical as well, because if you don't have that, there is going to be a lot of friction and handoff consideration. So from there, once we've picked the right team, it was really about picking the right technology platform. And on this end, I think I'm going to pass it over to you, Nick, right, to talk about that. Yeah?
Sounds good. So, one of the questions that Andrey asked when he came and met with us was, should we go native, should we go hybrid? And that's an important question. The whole world of software has gone mobile first in the last 5 years. So things that happened 5 years ago in mobile development don't really reflect well upon what's capable, what you can do today, what the capabilities are. So, what are the trade-offs between native and hybrid in both directions? So that was a key thing. The appropriate use cases for Ionic and AngularJS as a mobile development platform. So one of the biggest, most popular cross-platform mobile frameworks right now is Ionic, and that's built on top of Angular. And sometimes you work with Ionic. It's really focused on modern phones. But you want to work with Angular. Angular has some limitations in large data sets. What are the use cases for both, and how do you sort of manage that when building an app, and is it the right fit? Older device support was important because we're talking about the enterprise and the corporate space, so iOS 3 and Android 2.3. And support for mobile web as well as published apps. So one of the things you can do is an omni-channel application. You can build, that's one of the great things about hybrid, is you can build a mobile app, you can publish it to the iOS store, the Apple store, you can publish it to Google Play Store, and you can host it as your mobile web experience. So that can be great if you want to, say, support BlackBerry, support Windows Phone, but not do it with a published app as a mobile web option for people who are on those in a large enterprise environment. So that's the core about the technical platform, and we'll talk a little more about that. But basically, my answer to Andrey was that your application, what you want to do is a great fit for a hybrid app. You'll get to market faster. You can support the multiple platforms. One code base is more than just cost. It's time to market, but it's also flexibility and adaptability. If you build something and you launch it and you get feedback from end users and you want to change it, if you've got 3 or 4 different code bases, your ability to change to the market is going to be very limited. So, even if it was the same cost between native and hybrid, sometimes hybrid is far better because one code base gives you a lot of flexibility. So for what they want to do, achieving an extremely high user experience level across multiple phone platforms, it was the right technology. So building the application. It was an involved application. So internally, we basically joked we were trying to rebuild Facebook in 10 weeks, which the app is actually very similar in a lot of respects. You've got scrolling, you've got messages, you've got groups. There's just a lot of stuff going on in the app. So it wasn't easy. There was a lot of stuff that we had to do. We had to work with another team building out a remote API. We had to get an amazing user experience built. We had to get the app built and delivered. And hybrid is still more challenging in some respects because you are working across multiple platforms. So there is the support costs of that. So the app, as it came out, looks great. Looks like this. You can post to a stream. You can scroll through it. It's very visual. It pops. There's notifications. There's the ability to see leaderboards and see how you're doing. This was my favorite feature because if you're just doing like health and you're all competing, there's some people in your office that are just going to smoke everyone. Like one of the developers who worked on this project, he bicycles in every day from East York to downtown Toronto in the rain, in the winter. So you can imagine the points he'd be racking up on this, right? He's logging his cycling and tracking his activity. So I just flipped this over to the Wrangle Book Club, and I'm in like first place, right? So it's a wellness thing. There's like food, there's cycling. It's a cool app, but it was about the engagement. And these leaderboards kept people engaged because it allowed you to engage with your department, across the company, your interests. So it was very cool. But some of the technical challenges were Ionic focuses on modern phones, so iOS 7 and Android 4.1. So we were building for a lot of older phones. So how do you deal with that? So our strategy was to build for the modern phones, test, and then optimize for the older phones. So that was a key strategy, and it worked very well. We've used Ionic on a lot of other projects since, and sometimes you just have to turn off a piece and hand optimize. You don't prematurely optimize the app for older phones. You build for the modern ones, and then you work back. Large data sets. So you could see from those app pictures, there was just a lot of data. Infinite scroll, you can just keep flipping through there and bring up 1,000 posts. So you have to manage the memory. On newer phones, you don't notice it. You install it on a Galaxy S3, and all of a sudden, it collapses, right? So how do you handle that? Complex keyboard interactions. This is one of the stranger, more challenging things with hybrid mobile apps, in that Android and iOS and these different phones handle keyboard events differently. And when you're doing a mobile phone with lots of modals and pop-ups and screens, you're getting some complexity in terms of the DOM and how these events are propagating. So you'd end up with things like a keyboard randomly popping up, or you'd want to have a keyboard pop up automatically for the right user experience. Like, I want to track an activity. I don't want to have to go to the screen and then click on a keyboard icon to pop it up. I want it to pop up. And then when I'm done, submit it. So we use a lot of custom keyboards, soft keyboards. There was a lot of complexity there. Once it was sorted out, it was fine, but it was one of the technical challenges. Working with Ionic, you might think, well, Ionic has lovely CSS, and we've got all these sort of goodies for building our widgets and our panels and everything. The thing is, when you build a really strong UX and you put a lot of design thought into it, you deviate from that a lot. Plus, when you're looking at the stream, you're building out really a different layout, a different view. There's challenges, there's groups, there's departmental things, there's different leaderboards. The CSS is still a very, very significant aspect of the project. And so giving the right amount of thought to your CSS architecture and keeping it clean. One of the challenges was the application got quite big, multiple developers working on it, and you start getting some regression because of CSS, and you're fighting the CSS as the application gets bigger. This is a traditional challenge in all web applications. It's as important when building a non-trivial Ionic hybrid app. Achieving native-like fluidity, right? People have an expectation. This is an app. I just downloaded it from the App Store. I want it to be great. I want it to do what I want. I want things immediately. You want to have that fluidity. So that's one of those questions about hybrid apps. Can they achieve that? And the answer is yes, most certainly. But you have to know what you're doing. The other thing is there wasn't a lot of good profiling tools on older Android devices. So when you were trying to figure out what was happening with the DOM or with memory, the tools just weren't there. So you had to work a little bit more blind, so to speak. So that leads us to the lessons learned. So from the technical perspective, a ton of lessons learned. So I talked about a few of these already. Build with Ionic's modern principles and optimize as needed. I mean, otherwise you're going to spend so much time thinking about things you don't really need to think about. So build the app, test it, work with the good phones, and then start testing on the older phones as soon as you can so you can make the right decisions and optimizations. So that's worked successfully on almost every project that we've done that's mobile. DOM manipulations on large data sets and structures with JavaScript is very costly, so you want to minimize the DOM manipulations, and I'll talk a little more about that. The CSS style, so you sort of put drop shadows and cool things that look nice, but then you start scrolling and manipulating the DOM. These things are very expensive comparatively to other CSS things, and that can hammer performance. So you're not that restricted. You can do almost everything you want, but you just have to be a little bit choosy about what CSS you use to maximize performance on older devices. Learn your mobile profiling tools. Like, there's so much that you can learn looking at the JavaScript, the CSS, and the DOM with the right profiling tools, with the right dev tools. CSS especially, it's amazing how many people don't actually know how to get in and really profile your CSS and how it's behaving and performing. A huge technical lesson, I've actually spoken about this one, actually I think altogether Wrangle has talked about this at 3 different conferences. It can be really hard to identify if there are issues with the app or the API. And there's a few other ones, like REST APIs are always more work than expected, and that's sort of the truth of single-page applications. It's brutal. Like, if you're working with a back-end team and you're just going to wait for them to be finished, you're not going to be doing anything. You want to start building, you want to get to market. The front end is more work than the back end usually, but you got 2 teams and you've got to coordinate. So that was a huge lessons learned, and we've actually built an open source library to help make that sort of easier. We've got a lot of practices that we bring to all of our REST API type projects. But you talk to people about this, and it's like, oh my God, I thought it was just me. I thought it was just our team. It's like, the API still doesn't work, and we can't get anything done. But there's strategies that you can take, and expect it. The API is going to be a challenge.
Wasn't the case with Sprout. Everything was great.
Yes.
Just got it all done right away.
So, infinite scroll challenges, right? So the older phone, like everyone wants infinite scroll. It's cool. It's nice. It's it's engaging. It didn't work very well in initial testing on the older phone. So at the time, we researched different ways of doing it. We tested things, and we basically replaced both Ionic and Angular with a very native, low-level, batched infinite scroll to keep it fast and smooth. And I'll talk a little more about that. There's different types of slow, right? So you're going through a scroll, and all of a sudden you get to the bottom, and it's hanging there while you're waiting for the next batch. It's not as much fun as just spinning it up. Occasional pauses. So you're scrolling, and it seems to be working well, and then it just sort of freezes for a second, and it gets a little jittery. Or it's just slow, and you're bored because you want to see, what everyone's eating and exercising, what they're doing, and it's just going too slow. So you want to avoid this. So how do you avoid the slow? A fetch queue. So you get data ahead of time before you have to display it. That's pretty essential. You want to reduce the cost of rendering. So you want to limit how many times you update the DOM. Ionic has this really cool collection repeat thing that allows you to build out an infinite scroll in about 60 seconds. The problem is it is really built for newer phones, and it doesn't deal with variable height elements, right? So the Sprout application is very rich in media. You've got big pictures, you've got small pictures, you've got challenges, you've got events, and each one of those is very carefully designed to reflect what the user wants out of that data. It's all about the user experience. And collection repeat just doesn't work, right? So there's this beautiful, easy, quick thing. The demos look great. It doesn't work in real life. And then removing Angular's digest cycle activity. When you have 1,000 elements, you do not want to be checking them every time you're making a slight change to the screen. And if you do all that, you're golden. I mean, we tested back on old phones, and it was great. It's good. I mean, your thumb would get tired. You could spin it so fast.
Some point in time, Nick wanted to kill me and throw me out of the window because I was wearing my product hat and I was saying it's still slow, but we got over it.
Yeah, we did. So doing it without Angular. So use an asynchronous rendering queue, do raw DOM insertions, do batching of insertions. You do use the request animation frame. Use skinny directives to encapsulate what you're doing. So it's an Angular application. You write all this non-Angular code. You wrap it with a nice little directive, and now you can just use it within that Angular sort of style of declarative assembly of your components. The downside is a lot more work than using Angular, but it's worth it, and it's only a small part of the application. We're talking about a 10-week application, or 10 to 12 weeks with 3 people on the front end, and this is maybe 4 or 5 days of work. And that's without actually having done it before at this level with this complexity. So once the problem's solved, it's actually not that hard to do. The other thing that's actually become very popular as well is using React for doing similar things, because React does a lot of the diffing and can work really well with infinite scroll. And we've used React on some later projects to accomplish some of the same things. So the weight of the accumulated DOM, right? You're scrolling and it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So that means slow scrolling. You got to fix that. Solution: remove hidden DOM elements. So kudos to LinkedIn. They published how they did this when they were building hybrid apps a few years ago. And then there's another solution: overflow scrolling instead of ion scroll. So again, this was an Ionic feature that was great for quickly building apps on modern phones, but didn't really work that well for infinite scroll on older phones. And then again, I mentioned the tools earlier: comprehensive polling of JavaScript, CSS, and the DOM. So, thanks to our amazing design team, and Varun did a lot of this work. Our CTO, Yuri, did a lot of the optimization on the infinite scroll. So I got these slides from Varun, so he knows them better than I do. But, the point is, if you really want to have a good hybrid app, you got to know your browser. You got to know HTML5. You got to know your CSS. And you have to understand, generally speaking, how HTML is parsed. You've got the DOM. You're going to render it, and it's going to be laid out, and it's going to be repainted. And if you understand what's happening there, then you know sort of intuitively what's going to break that. A key thing: high frame rates and performance is important to user experience. And so, smooth high frame rates, that drives user engagement and can affect how much users interact with your website or your app. So it's really important. Now, if you're looking at 16 milliseconds per frame, each frame in the browser, there'll be some JavaScript that gets evaluated. It's going to recalculate the style for the elements. It's going to recalculate layout if the styles are modified by JavaScript. And it's going to draw a subset of the page to various layers. And then it's going to use the GPU to composite these layers onto the screen. So there's a lot going on, and you're looking at these frames, and you're building them out, and you're rendering the DOM. So what can you do to avoid, too much of a cost while doing all this? So reflow or relayout occurs when there are changes to the document content, the structure, or the element position. So obviously you're adding nodes to the DOM, you're changing the structure, you're moving things around. So you do some batch insertions and you minimize what you're doing there. There are styles that do affect layout. So going back to this one, document content, structure, and element position. So focusing on that last one. Styles that affect layout. So these are things that you just might think of doing without even really thinking about it. But you're changing the height, the margin, border width, font size. All of these things affect the cost and affect layout. So you want to minimize what you're doing with these. Styles that affect paint, so you're repainting. And if you're doing this a lot, it gets very expensive again. Color, visibility. So you can use these and set them, just don't be changing them. That's the main point, right? Because that's what's going to cause the reflow and the repaint. And if you're doing that all the time, again, it's very expensive. So you might think, but this is really important. Animation is really important for user experience. People are used to it. It sort of keeps you engaged, and you don't get bored because you see pretty things moving around on the screen. It's a UX clue that something's happening. It teaches you how to use the app and gives you a feeling of the flow. And so it's important, right? So what's the hope? Is there hope for animation on a hybrid app? And there are lots of options. So, you can scale, position, rotate, skew. You can work in multiple dimensions, and you can affect opacity. There's a lot of stuff you can do there, and you can achieve the effects you want and the transitions you want. The main thing is just don't do it the wrong way. And with a hybrid app, you're working on a small screen, you have not that many elements that you're laying out. It's actually, this is easily enough of a toolbox to achieve what you want to do. So that's sort of the technical challenges and sort of what the solutions were. Once they were in place, you got your foundation, the app's working, you're incrementally adding features. It's pretty smooth sailing once you've got that core sort of application architecture in place. But, there were still some other things that you want to consider in building a mobile app. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Andrey.
Thank you. I don't know if you guys notice, he's the technical guy. I just here for the show, talk about process a lot, etc. Unrelated to anything, if you Google in images, or at least when we put those slides together a couple of weeks ago, process lessons learned, this came up. I don't know why, but I liked it, so I put it here. Looks good. So process lessons. Really want to talk a little bit about, well, there is the technical lessons learned. There is a lot of process-related lessons learned as well. You have two teams that are trying to work in tandem and trying to build a hybrid application. And I think in the end, probably all of you guys still have this question, okay, well, when should I build hybrid? When should I build native? Is hybrid really an option? And I believe there were quite a few sessions here as well about it. We'll address that as well. But the most important thing in the process was design. Really understanding that design is an ongoing process and you cannot design everything up front was crucial between the two teams. You have to start with something. If you try to design everything up front, you're going to be stuck. And with the time frame that we've had of 10 weeks, we really needed to collaborate really well and make sure that the design portion was actually, the two teams were aligned. So collaborate early and identify team roles as it relates to design, but also as it relates to other things. If you do not have specific leads identified in each individual team who is accountable and responsible for a specific piece, then no one is really accountable and things will not be delivered on time because everyone will think that someone else is doing something. So you got to call that out. We've caught it pretty early on in the process because initially we're really trying to be collaborative and everyone has a way to speak and everyone has a way to do. And we really identified, okay, that person is responsible for this on the front end. Here is a person from Sprout that is responsible for things on the back end, and things were really smooth after that.
I would add one thing there is like if you're actually shipping features and building stuff, this gets surfaced a lot earlier.
Yep.
If you get caught up in working on the front end, working on the back end, and not actually trying to make this stuff work together, then you can have big misses. So.
Big misses, yeah, and big misses in time to market too. So super critical. And I know all of this sounds like common sense, and you're looking at it probably, God, yeah, I know, right? It makes sense. But in hindsight, it doesn't. And when you're right in it, you're not thinking about it. So that's super important. Do not underestimate the REST API. Nick talked about it. I'll speak about it. It's not like we underestimated it quite a bit, but we did, right? And in the end, always assume that it's going to be much, much more work. We've had a working backend. We knew exactly what we're doing. We were not necessarily adding any new functionality. And it was still brutally hard to work against specific expectations and specs and make sure that everything is integrated and works smoothly. So do not underestimate it. Document it well and make sure that the API reflects the to-be API. So one thing that we caught on early on as well is we said, okay, we don't really care how things work today. Here's how we want it to work. Here's how we specify it together. We spec'd it, and then both of the teams worked together on each individual piece, and then we brought it all together continuously. We really had this continuous integration thing. We were not waiting necessarily one for the other, but we were trying to integrate the pieces as soon as possible.
I would say that sort of the to-be API, that takes what would have been a quick project and maybe makes it even 3 or 4 times more work because the amount of translation you have to do in the data, plus you start hitting things that you didn't think about because you're hitting different kinds of joins in the database. So you're really loading the database from a different access pattern because you're trying to create that sort of document-oriented, REST API sort of payload that you're going to be sending back. The other thing is, like, everybody tries to put the business rules in the domain logic because nobody likes to put business rules into the user interface, but the truth of the fact is there's a ton of business rules that are in the user interface, and you only realize that when you start trying to put an API on an existing system and have to write another 30% more code to implement. I'm not saying that was the Sprout case, but generally these two things, that to-be API and getting the business rules that were scattered throughout the user interface, take something that feels like it should take 3 or 4 days and makes it like 3 or 4 weeks. That's right.
And I think to add to this, or I'll use a very specific example. When we were doing the to-be API, one of the key things was this, Nick was mentioning a leaderboard, right? And that leaderboard, to make sure that it displays smoothly and you can see all of the different leaderboards, required a completely different data representation that we realized we did not have at all on the back end. So as we're building the REST API to give a collection of leaderboards, we're performing humongous calculations to, you're thinking you have tens of thousands of users in some organizations. We have an organization with 80,000 users, right? And now you're trying to figure out who is leading where based on the different filters that are set up for this department, for this location, etc. So super important. And those challenges, we really underestimated them initially. So be aware of those. Try to surface them earlier. They're telling me we only have 10 minutes left. I'll really rush. So write separate tests for API as well. That was key. Some conclusions and recommendations. I'll go and I'll start with, actually, I'll let you talk about it. When to use Ionic and Angular?
Yeah. So Ionic and Angular are great for business-oriented applications, applications that have a lot of data, and applications that have a REST API. The reason for that is that they're built around, like Ionic's built around a mobile experience that's sort of the common things, the common elements. And those common elements are the things that you see in most, data-driven applications. You've got slide outs, you've got menus, you've got forms. There's a lot of great functionality there. Angular really is actually really fast for manipulating the DOM. Like people talk about the digest cycle being slow, but Angular is extremely fast because it's really tightly bound to the DOM. Where you run into issues is with huge data sets that have to be analyzed all the time. And so if you're talking about all the forms and everything and your sort of single screen pages, Angular rocks, and it's way faster than, say, jQuery Mobile. When I started working in the Angular and PhoneGap spaces, I ran into a lot of people who had done jQuery Mobile, and it was a train wreck. It was just so slow, and they migrated to Angular, and it was awesome. But when you start, again, specific cases, that long scrolling, infinite scroll, you run into some challenges. Now, you may want to rethink this if you're writing a game that's really animation heavy, if you're doing like a molecular simulator, stuff like that. But if you have limited animations that are really there for building the user experience, like your little transitions and little jiggles and things like that, then you're really good to go. And then, it is really about a user base that is largely using modern phones, because you are building for that group. And whereas we got good performance on the older phones, it wasn't like you couldn't tell the difference, say, between a native app and the hybrid app on a Galaxy S3. On the latest and greatest sort of iPhones and Android phones, it's really hard to tell the difference. So there is a little, loss there. So, and then I would say that they're great for social applications that have some interaction and information and are information consuming rather than information creation tools. These are excellent candidates. And that really has to do, like, if you're doing something that you're doing lots of interesting swipes and interactions, then you really end up diving more into the native tools. Like the HTML paradigm is about layout and information presentation. But, I mean, you saw the pictures of the app before, and you'd be hard-pressed to know if it was, you couldn't tell, really, for the most part, if it was native or hybrid. And I would also add that with hybrid, you're using the web view, and the web is amazing, right? For laying out information and presenting information, there are a ton of applications, even like the Apple Store app. They use hybrid technology. They're using the web view and HTML to represent data back, like for online stores and things like that, because it's a layout language. It describes the presentation of data. So when not to use it, there you go. Like as I said, apps running heavy animation, such as games. Apps that require extremely fast performance on older phones. And Android is really problematic in this respect, especially last year. So the early versions of Android before Android 4, they had like the WebKit browser and they had Chrome. And someone called the WebKit browser the IE6 of the mobile world. And it's a fairly accurate description. What a horror show. And that's one of the reasons that hybrid development was really difficult early on, was the early versions of Android. They really botched that. And they've gotten a lot better. And the ecosystem, because mobile is so important, the ecosystem, including the Ionic team, solved a lot of these problems, sort of like jQuery solved the problem of IE6 for everyone by wrapping it all up. So Ionic sort of helps with that, and the whole ecosystem. And then got 2 more slides. So build your app first for modern phones. You want to talk a little bit to this from a business? I mean, this was,
Sure. This is where we practiced, and we were under time, but we tend to blabber, it seems. So the key thing here is, as Nick said, build your apps first for modern phones. And this is the approach that we took. You can get good performance on a wide variety of devices, including some of the older phones if you optimize it right. The key is to optimize for older phones only after building for modern phones, and that was one of the key things that we've done. We've built the core application, then we spent several weeks on optimizing and making it better. And what we've proven really is, if you take the right approach and if you pick the right technology, and if you look at the problem that you have at hand and you're trying to look at it objectively with all of the constraints that you have in mind, you will accomplish what you need. We've made trade-offs. I'm not going to stand here and say, hybrid blows away native. It doesn't. But for what we needed to do, it was as good, if not better. And we were able to optimize the application to perform well on older phones as well. And that's, I think, was the key lesson learned, perhaps, from this whole thing, right? But most importantly, you can save time and money. So in the end, we brought up an application to market between 10 to 12 weeks. So we've hit, our goal of when we needed to have the application in the market. And we were able to really focus it and deliver it on multiple code lines. So we've had an application on iOS and Android, available in Google Play, App Store, and at the same time, we have a mobile web version that can be accessed now by any other device that is not supported by those stores and have the exact same experience, and the experience is good. And that was key. So you write your app once and you deploy it to multiple platforms. The flexibility and focus also really enabled us to utilize the single code base. And you know what? In the end, I have, at this point, one person maintaining this app who is sitting at the back, who was able to really deliver a lot of features in the past year as well, right, that are quite substantial across multiple platforms. And when you have a resource-constrained environment and you're a startup and you're trying to get something to market fast, my recommendation would be, if that is the application for you, the technology will work. If you pick the right partner, if you pick the right team, the technology will work. And with that, I will say thank you. We have a case study. You can download it at GoWrangle.io, Sprout. And thank you, Nick, for all the help and everything. And
thank you.
Any questions?
Yeah.
How many developers did you have combined front and back in the 10-week gap?
So we had 3 on the front.
And 3 on the back.
Oh, okay, so 6.
Yeah,
Very good.
6 in total. Yeah. Any other questions? I think we have about 2 minutes, so feel free.
Yeah.
You mentioned you had a back end already. What was your back end before moving to
It was all based on LAMP, so Linux, Apache, PHP, MySQL at the back end. And then we utilized the framework to build the REST API on top of that at this point in time. Now, what it allowed us to do actually is we're talking, considering whether we want to transition to Node at some point in time, but now we can do that actually, or we will be able to hopefully. Other questions? Yep.
You said the design sort of shifted throughout the process. How did you manage that?
Very carefully. Sorry, I didn't mean to. I just, no. We've realized that the design is going to change, and what we've done is we've really made sure that weekly, bi-weekly, etc. We're working very closely, and we're working first and foremost on the front end without connecting it to any back end at all. We're figuring out the interaction. We're reviewing it live, then we tweak it, and only then we develop the back end. And I think that was the key lesson learned there, and that's what we're trying to apply now as well. Throughout our work, right, to make sure that we build the front end first. And with HTML, CSS, it's super easy, right? You can just put it together. You can see how it works in the browser. 1 minute, you have it built on the device. You can play around with it. And then if it needs to be tweaked, you tweak it. Then once you figured out the interaction, the layout of information, and everything else, you go and you tweak the back end, whatever was specified there. That makes sense? Answer your question?
And then just delivering features and getting the feedback. So before you start the next feature, you can update the design.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the key things is not to get too hung up on the original design, because you're changing something. Everybody has the running app. We know what's being built next. So rather than getting too deep back in a design, use a pencil, use a sketch, scan it, and then use that as your reference. You attach it to the story for the developers the next week. So you can actually, we would have the original mock-ups and UX work, and then we would have the sketch, and the developers could look at the 2 of those and then actually implement the revised sort of design. So without having to go through a deep design phase every time.
And now we have 0 minutes.
So one more question in the middle though, quickly.
I'm just curious what your use of PhoneGap, how does that play and what it's used for?
So PhoneGap is really just a packaging tool that you can take your hybrid app and package it, and you get some libraries for handling different services on the different phones. So some clients that we've worked with, it's a hybrid app, but they write their own wrapper and package it that way. It really depends on the nature of the project. All right, well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.